This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Why the magic number for the rest of the 2018 football season is 25. Next on Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Clark. Waits for it. Hit. Caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison.
Brady gets terrific. Throws it. Get it. Touchdown. Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue, I'm Batman. Welcome to this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. I am Steve Dace. Joining us a little bit later on, Michael Spath. My partner from Wolverine Digest from WTKA in Ann Arbor will be joining us. This week's Twitter poll results, our question of the week, and more to come this week here on Michigan Podcast. But I begin with what we teased right at the very beginning. Why the magic number for the rest of 2018. You know, now that we're out of the non-conference portion of the season, or as former Michigan All-American lineman John Jansen likes to call it, the preseason. Now that we're done with the preseason and we look forward now to the rest of the campaign and Michigan gets ready for Big Ten play, there's a few things I think we know. And there's two in particular that I want to focus on as we begin this week's episode. Here's the first thing we know. The first thing we know is the defense is very good, but it's not special. And this team is going to go as far as Shea Patterson can take them. Now, let me start with the defense, okay? Because some of you are going to get upset that I said it's not special. But let's put this in perspective. Michigan's defense so far this year is giving up only 276.4 yards per game, 15.7 points per game. Amongst teams that have played 3 FBS opponents, it's number 1 in college football in yards per play. Now, those numbers are absolutely all outstanding, especially by today's standard where there are so many wide open offenses in college football. However, as we saw down the stretch last season, and as we've seen at times this year, like the first half against Notre Dame, the preseason comparisons that we were drawing between this defense and 1997 are, it's wishful thinking. It's not that level of special. It's really good. I mean, this is going to be at worst, I think, by the end of the year, even against the schedule we have coming up. At worst, it's going to be a top 10 defense nationally. At worst. Okay, but the 1997 stuff, you know, the preseason hypathon that we like to go through and every fan base goes through, that stuff, delusions of grandeur. But you know what? There is some good news. For this team to be good, the defense doesn't have to be 1997 good or 1997 special. And here's why. So far under Jim Harbaugh, Michigan has a 714 win percentage. That's a huge improvement over the 574 win percentage that the Wolverines had the decade prior to his arrival. But look how close it was to being even greater. If Michigan had managed to score a mediocre 25 points, that's it, 25 points. Let me put the number 25 in perspective before we go back to that graphic. Last year, if you averaged 25 points per game, you were 90th in the nation in scoring offense in college football, which is not good. Okay? So, 25 points is mediocrity, all right? So, if Michigan had managed to score a mediocre 25 points in 6 of Harbaugh's 12 losses so far, his win percentage becomes an insane 857. And think how much different the perception of the program would be with that offensive output. 90 offenses in college football last year averaged 25 points per game or better. Every haterade narrative is gone. Now, some of you are going to say, but Steve, winning all 6 of those games is not realistic. You're right. So check this out. If Michigan had managed to win just 3 of those games, when it needed to score 20 or fewer points, Harbaugh has 3 of his 12 losses. 3 of his 12 losses, all right? That's 25% of his losses at Michigan were in games where the opponent scored 20 or fewer points in regulation to win. At Iowa and at Ohio State in 2016 and Michigan State at home last year. If Michigan had just won those 3 games, if they had scored 21 points in regulation in those 3 games alone, consider how much different Harbaugh's resume looks. In 2017, you beat Michigan State. You're at worst 9-3. The whole can't win the rivalry thing, gone. In 2016 against Iowa and Ohio State, you finished that season in the regular season undefeated, and then you go to Indianapolis for the first time, and we see what happens in the rematch against Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game. But you're number 2 behind Alabama. You're undefeated. So heck, even if you lose that game to Wisconsin, you still might be in the playoff. Remember, Michigan almost got into the playoffs in 2016 with 2 losses and without winning the division. They went into the last week of the year. They were still ranked number 5. All right, so think of how much different everything looks with minimal offensive improvement for the Wolverines. So here's what I think this all means. In Shea Patterson, we trust. Here's the question. Now, can Shea Patterson get 25 points in every Big Ten game the rest of the year? If he can, at worst, Michigan is going to be 7-2 in the Big Ten. That's at worst. And likely better. That's the question. Now, it would seem to be, come on, we've got to manage that, Dace, but we haven't. See, we haven't done something around these parts in a long time, and that's play what the experts call complementary football. And last Saturday against SMU was one of the first examples I've seen of us do it in a long time. The defense, by our standards, scuffling. SMU had 2 touchdown drives. Both were over 11 plays. One was 16 plays. Defense couldn't get off the field. And yet the offense, every time SMU was threatening to make it a game, the offense scored. The offense scored on its last 6 possessions, but it was the last 2 possessions that it scored that mattered the most. They were good drives. They resulted in 10 points. They took a game that maybe Michigan might have been forced to sweat a little bit, like, say, last year against Cincinnati and Air Force, and instead they put the game away. That is the complementary football. It's going to be rare to have a defense like we had in 1997 ever. That's why we remember it 21 years later. But in today's wide open version of college football, it's even more rare than it even was back in the 1990s. So at some point, you've got to score some points to win. Does Michigan finally, and Shea Patterson, have the quarterback that can do that? I think that's the question that will ultimately determine if they can hit that magic number 25, and that magic number 25 is going to determine whether or not this is a meaningful college football season for the Wolverines or not. We get asked quite a bit here on Michigan Podcast, what can we do to support you guys? Well, here's one of the big ways you can support what we do. If you like how we finger roll here on Michigan Podcast each week, support us on Patreon. Several of you watching us each week here on YouTube do that already. Thank you very much. And if you support us just $5 a month, you get access to exclusive content, including my commentary on instant reaction after every Michigan football game, including including last Saturday night, Notre Dame versus Michigan. I recorded that at 1 a.m. You get my football picks each and every week as well. So we give you some stuff we don't offer everybody else as a thank you to those of you that support us every single month here on Patreon. Patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. Patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. Thank you and go blue to those of you that are supporting us already. All right, back here on Michigan Podcast, joined again this week by our good friend and our partner at Wolverine Digest, Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor. Michael, good to see you. Go blue. And your overall thoughts as we kind of take our first big picture look at the season, right? It's the first major benchmark coming out of the non-conference, as former Michigan All-American John Jansen likes to refer to this as the preseason. So what do you see here at the quarter pole of the 2018 Michigan football campaign?
Oh, gee, that's a good question. I mean, I see certainly a lot of positives. I think the passing game is coming along, I don't want to say better than we thought it was going to be, but certainly at the level we thought it was going to be. I really like what we've seen out of Shea Patterson so far. I really like what we've seen out of the wide receivers. The tight ends have been hit or miss, but when they're on, they're really good. And I think you can say the same thing about the entire offense. When the offense is hitting, they can be a top 20 offense in college football because they have all the elements there. They have the ability to be successful running the football with two really good running backs, in Karan Higdon and Chris Evans. They have a dynamic quarterback that can make all the throws, and the ability to hit the deep ball so quickly into his tenure is a huge success for Michigan. I know it took Wilton Spade a little bit of time when he got going. It took Jake Rudock a little bit of time to develop that type of chemistry with his wide receivers. So the offense can be really good. I think probably the biggest surprise 3 games into the season has been how lackluster the defense has been, Steve. I mean, I don't know about you, but that first half against Notre Dame shocked me. The way that they played against SMU was surprising. I think the areas that we were concerned about have all been areas that we should have been concerned about. The offensive line play was a concern going into the season, hasn't been overwhelmingly positive. The safeties, the secondary, the vulnerability there has been a vulnerability so far. So I think so far this team is what we thought it was going to be. I'm just surprised they came out so flat against Notre Dame in the opener. When you take a look at the Big Ten coming out of its non-conference season, what's your big picture there? I mean, just a huge disappointment. We're talking about a league that was supposed to be from, really strong at the top. And then from top to I would say about the 10th spot was supposed to be pretty good. You've got a lot of frauds in the Big Ten this year. Northwestern, I think, is a fraud. Purdue is a fraud. I think, if you look at the Big Five, Ohio State looks like they're as good as we thought they're going to be. Penn State, after an early struggle against Appalachian State, is playing really well. Michigan State, Wisconsin can still be very, very good. But certainly the fact that all 3 of those teams, the latter 3 teams, lost their big non-conference game certainly diminishes the reputation of the Big Ten a little bit and creates this razor-thin margin for error for those 3 teams at least getting to the college football playoff. I would say this, Zach Shaw and I, my co-host here at Inside the Huddle, we talked a lot about in the preseason about whether or not a 2-loss team in the Big Ten could make it, or if 2 teams in the Big Ten could make the college football playoff. And I think after what we've seen so far, there's really almost no shot that 2 teams will make it from the Big Ten. And I don't think a 2-loss team will make it from the Big Ten either this year. Well, I have no problem dropping the hammer when I think it's necessary. And frankly, all too often recently, it's been too necessary. But when it comes to the angst about the league, I would just caution people on a couple of fronts. Number one, in 2014, the Big Ten had a showdown Saturday, and it lost every one of those games. Michigan got shut out by Notre Dame. Virginia Tech won at Ohio State. It lost every single one of those showdown non-conference games. Everybody thought the league was toast. Ohio State won the college football playoff that year. And then last year, the only really quality non-conference win that the league got last year was when Iowa won at Iowa State that ended up being an 8-win team. And then the league went 7-1 in bowl games. So I agree, and the whole, this is the most losses they've ever had to unranked teams in one weekend. Well, to be fair, we've only been a 14-team league for a few years, and one of them's Rutgers. So some of these things are a little hot takey,
like Harbaugh's got the same record as Brady Hoke from the Pete Feinbaum media. It was not a good showing. It was an ass showing. We showed ass all over the fruited plain of the Big Ten. There's no question about that. But really, when you look outside of the top of the SEC, with Alabama, Georgia, LSU's the first team since 1976 to get 2 top 10 wins in its first 3 weeks. That was Missouri, who went on to go 6-5 that year, by the way. But when you take a look at just the top few teams in the SEC and look at the rest of the leagues around the country, tell me whose depth as a conference really stands out of the non-conference, because I don't really see it actually anywhere.
No, I would agree with you in that point, Steve. I'll say this. Where I look at the disappointment of the Big Ten is, you're right. If Ohio State runs the table, or whoever makes the college football playoff from the Big Ten, if they go out there and win the national championship or make it the national championship game, then we're not talking about this non-conference narrative. But the fact of the matter is, when you have 3 of your 5 marquee teams lose a non-conference game, and 2 of them losing to an unranked team when they were ranked in the top, 12 in the country, what it changes is the fact that going forward here, Michigan, the Big Ten is not going to get that benefit of the doubt. If you get to early December and you've got a 12-1 Ohio State team and you've got an 11-2 Wisconsin team, I think the issue there is that because they had that non-conference loss, I think you don't get the benefit of the doubt in terms of getting consideration for a second Big Ten team. That's the only place I think it hurts them. But otherwise, I agree with you, Steve, that as long as the best team in the Big Ten goes out there and has a good showing in the college football playoff, nobody will really remember the non-conference narrative. And certainly, as long as the Big Ten goes out there and performs in bowl games, same type of thing. It'll get brushed to the side. But right now, here we are in week 3 or going into week 4. The conference is taking a reputation hit.
One last question on the Big Ten globally, and then we'll return and finish out talking about Michigan here. I think the question that's going to decide this, or go a long way towards deciding this conference, is if Urban Meyer is content winning football games the way Ohio State has looked the first few weeks. And here's what I mean by that. They've given up an over 50-yard touchdown play all 3 weeks. All right, and the first 2 weeks they played Oregon State, who had the lowest season win total in the Power 5 in Vegas, except for Kansas. The second week they played Rutgers, and then they played TCU, and that's with a new quarterback really making his first start of his career against a team with a pulse. And I think the reason why is, on one hand, they've had 2 straight years, Michael, where they've been rated in the secondary with early entries to the NFL draft, and after a while, even as well as you recruit there, that eventually catches up. But the other is the kind of offense they're playing. This is not the same offense that all spread offenses are not the same. Urban Meyer wants to run a power spread. That's what he ran with Tim Tebow at Florida. It's what he ran with J.T. Barrett here at Ohio State. He wants a quarterback that can run between the tackles on 3rd and 4, be a running threat, and use that to set up the downfield passing game. Dwayne Haskins is, I think, unlike any quarterback we've seen at Ohio State, I think maybe in our lifetimes. I think he's got a level of arm talent that they just haven't typically had there. And I think that makes them more prone defensively, because they're going to score on more big plays offensively, and they're going to give up more big plays defensively. We saw a few years ago when they had a Cardale Jones that Urban Meyer was not content having him go out there and fling the ball around the yard. When he started him over J.T. Barrett, he wanted him to be a power spread guy, and it didn't work. I think that's going to be fascinating, especially if Bosa is out for the year, which when you're in street clothes, you're not coming back in a couple weeks. That just, it never works out that way. So I don't know if he's out for the year or not, but I think he's out for at least a considerable amount of time. And as good as they are defensively, he is their one guy coming off the edge that gets pressure on his own. And so I think if you take away your one edge rushing guy, that means you probably got to blitz more to get pressure on the quarterback. That exposes that back 7 even more. I want to see Urban Meyer say to Ryan Day, you know what, you keep running this offense the way you want, because that's just not the way he has rolled in the past. And I will be fascinated to see if he is okay with Dwayne Haskins throwing the ball all over the yard and putting the defense on the field more. That could be one of the biggest questions that determines the rest of the season here in the Big Ten.
Well, it's interesting because, certainly Urban Meyer recruited Dwayne Haskins, right? So, he had to have known what this guy's strengths were, and he does seem like a guy that, as he's evolved as a quarterback, feels much more comfortable in the pocket than the guy that's out there running the football. Now, we saw against Michigan last year that if he needs to run the football, he can. I agree with you. I mean, it certainly seems like a different type of offense than what Urban Meyer has done in the past. And the fact that wide receivers at Ohio State, it's been a decade since we talked about wide receivers at Ohio State, right? We've got a couple guys drafted, but it's been almost on sheer talent versus on production. And now you're seeing guys produce because you've got a big arm quarterback that can get up the ball down the field. So certainly what he does with that. I tell you the thing about, you bring up Bosa, and you look at Michigan, and Rick Black is out for an extended amount of time with a preseason injury, and Aubrey Solomon, we were talking about on our show on Tuesday, has missed some time. I think what's going to decide this race going forward is almost the game of attrition. Is among the powers, if somebody loses, if Ohio State loses Bosa, that is a monumental loss for them on that defense because of what he does in terms of his pass rush ability. Michigan's lost a couple of guys. Someone's going to lose somebody here coming up. Is it going to be Penn State, and they're going to lose? What happens if Penn State were to lose McSorley for a little bit, or Michigan State were to lose Lewerke? Last year we saw that with Michigan, where they were down to their third quarterback, and Ohio State's been able to survive losing quarterbacks the last couple of years. But someone's going to lose a big player, and maybe that was the big player in Bosa. But I'm curious to see how attrition ends up impacting, because of the fact that we've got such a strong top 4, top 5 in the Big Ten, and that it's almost like whoever doesn't lose anybody or loses the fewest is the team that's going to survive in this one.
All right, let's return here and finish out talking about Michigan coming out of the non-conference. And I wrote a piece for Wolverine Digest this week, and we talked about it in the opening monologue to the show, looking at Harbaugh's 12 losses at Michigan. And in those 12 losses, half of those losses were to teams that scored 24 points or fewer. 24 points or fewer, which means if Michigan had just scored 25 points in those games, to keep that in perspective, last year, if you averaged 25 points a game in college football, you were the 90th best scoring offense. So that's not good, by the way. All right, so we're not asking a lot. Now, you're not going to win all of those games. I mean, sometimes the other team's going to make a play. So let's say you even win half of those 6 losses. We'll even just give away the other 6. And if those 6 where the opposing team scored 24 points or fewer, let's say Michigan had won half of those games, especially because half of those 6 games, Michael, the opponent scored 17 points or fewer and still beat Michigan. If you put those 3 wins, and those would be, and I'm talking about regulation, of course, because Ohio State got over that in double overtime in Columbus in 2016, but 20 points would have won in regulation in Columbus in 2016. 20 points would have won at Iowa City. 20 points would have won against Michigan State last year. I mean, how much different would Harbaugh's resume be with 20 points scored in regulation of just those 3 of his 12 losses? And I think that's what the margin for error is. And I think that's where you turn and you look at Shea Patterson and you ask yourself, do you think this year he is the quarterback that lets Michigan do something that's really eluded us for a long time? The decade prior to Harbaugh, our win percentage was .574. Under Harbaugh, it is .714. That's a tremendous improvement. But again, if we had won some of those games where we didn't have to score a lot of points to win, it would be in Dabo Swinney, Jimbo Fisher, Nick Saban territory. So do they have the quarterback this year? Because I agree with you on the defense. It's a really good defense. I mean, they're giving up 280 yards and 15 points a game. That's freaking great. But it's not 1997, so I think we need to get those delusions of grandeur out of our heads. It's a really good defense, like the one we saw last year. If the offense can play complementary football, which hasn't been done around these parts in a long time, can they score 21, 24 points against Michigan State, against Wisconsin, against Ohio State, Penn State? If they can do that, they've got the defense to win 3 of those games. Now, the question becomes, do they have the quarterback to do it? What say you, Michael?
I think they absolutely have the quarterback to do it. I mean, we were talking about on our show whether or not this is the best quarterback since when. And what I said is, if you look at a quarterback as like a 5-tool, it's a baseball term, right? A guy that can make any throw, a guy that has the arm strength to make the short window throw. Shea Patterson has that. The ability to hit the deep ball, Shea Patterson can do that. The ability to run the football, Shea Patterson can do that. The ability to improvise and make plays when the play is broken down, he can do that. And I know there was a fifth one, and I'm forgetting what the fifth tool was for a quarterback. But he's a guy that I look at, honestly, I have to go back all the way to Drew Henson in 2000. I think he's the most complete quarterback physically and from a talent perspective that Michigan has had in the last 20 years. And so I truly believe that your magic number of 25, that he should be in a position to put up 25 points in every single game this year. And in fact, I would say that if you put up 25 points in every single game this year, you probably beat Michigan State, you probably beat Wisconsin. I think Penn State and Ohio State have offenses, from what I've seen in the first couple of weeks, that are on different levels. I think those are going to be the two teams that Michigan's facing here, in the Big Ten season, that they're going to have to do more than just score 25 points. But I think every other team, if you got to that 25 to 28 range, I think you'd beat every other team on Michigan's schedule, because I agree with you, the defense is going to be good enough. There's a couple of weak spots. But I think Don Brown is smart enough to cover those areas, to patch that work up a little bit. You got to, if you do that, and you can do that with this quarterback, I'm right there with you that I certainly think that Michigan will win a lot of games. Then it just comes down to, can they outscore a couple of teams down the way? I think you're going to have to outscore Penn State and outscore Ohio State.
This true or false question. True or false, if Michigan gets to 25 points in every Big Ten game this year, they will be no worse than 7-2 in the conference. True or false?
True.
I agree with you. I think that is the magic number. And I would look at Penn State, and I agree their offense is better than Michigan State's, Wisconsin's. I don't think their defense is as good as those. So there's kind of a trade-off there. And then you're looking at that Ohio State game, and you wonder what's Bosa's health, if indeed he's going to be out for a while. And that's something that remains to be seen. Michael, good to see you again this week on Michigan Podcast. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Well, we've been teasing this since we launched Season 2 of Michigan Podcast, and now it's here. Wolverine Digest, part of the Maven Network, launched this week. This is a new endeavor from myself and Michael Spath from WTKA. And this is really, for those of you that can't get enough of the kind of analysis that we do here on Michigan Podcast, this is right up your alley in print, because this is content targeted for the critical thinking fan, meaning you're okay with honest analysis, and that honest analysis may not always be, when we lose, we're the victims, we was robbed. You want to know what you need to know about why you saw what you saw in the last game, and why the next game might get better or might not. And that's what we're going to bring you each and every day at Wolverine Digest. Now, here's my sneaky favorite part of the website. If you go to the right here where it says Conversations, and if you follow like Mike Florio at Pro Football Talk or websites like that, what we're able to do here is throughout the course of the day, like if you just keep our site bookmarked all day long, and you want to stay away from the social media cesspool out there, let us navigate it for you, because we are keeping you up to date on the best Michigan-related content and breaking news that happens on a daily basis, and we're able to keep that running. Scroll there, just update that throughout the course of each and every day for you here at Wolverine Digest. So that might be my favorite part of the website, is that Conversations thing that you see there on the right side of the front page. So if you can't get enough, if you love what we do here at Michigan Podcast, when the show is over, we just move over to WolverineDigest.com. On purpose, I did not leave a cop-out option of you haven't changed your mind, because that's how I would have voted. Because we're not as far along in a couple of areas as I had hoped, and we saw that against Notre Dame. But I think we're also learning that the league is not quite the gauntlet. It's still very good, but it is not quite the impossible gauntlet that we thought it was a few weeks ago either. And so things have kind of regressed to the mean a little bit. So I'm right to where I was in the preseason. I still think this is a team that will be 10-2. I did think we'd beat Notre Dame, so maybe you end up 9-3 at worst case scenario. But I think we have the makings now of correcting the things that have caused us to lose so many of these big games so far in the Harbaugh era. And I think a lot of that has to do with the guy we have under center right now. This week's question of the week comes from Devin Ryland, who says, is it just me, or does it seem like this team is not much different than the 2017 team? I agree with you, except in one area. I agree this team isn't much different than the 2017 team. It just so happens, though, that one area is the most important area in football. That guy right there on the other side of your screen. That's a pretty big difference. That guy right there is. All of a sudden, Donovan Peoples-Jones, nobody's talking about him being a 5-star washout. Nobody's talking about that right now. Why? Because of that guy. That guy we didn't have him last year, okay? I mean, right now, he's putting up crazy numbers. You're averaging 9 yards an attempt in that kind of offense we run. We're not running an air raid out here with Mike Leach guys. You average over 9 yards an attempt in a Harbaugh offense, you're making plays, okay? In a pro-style offense, that's a crazy number. So, yeah, in many respects, we are the same team we were last year. We were pretty good on special teams last year. I think we had the number 1 kick coverage unit in the country. We had, Donovan Peoples-Jones return a punt for a touchdown. Ambry Thomas has already had a kickoff return for a touchdown. We've already blocked a punt. We were outstanding on defense last year, gave about 280 yards and 14 points a game. We're roughly at those numbers this year. What's changed is we have a quarterback that can push the ball down the field and make plays. We did not have that last year, maybe even really the last couple of years, except for some glimpses from Wilton Spate before he got hurt. So largely, you're right, Devin. We are the same team we were last year with one exception, but it's the most important exception of them all, quarterback. Well, thank you for watching us here this week on Michigan Podcast. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. We'll keep you up to date with our thoughts on the Wolverines all week long. Check out the website, WolverineDigest.com, WolverineDigest.com, and a shout out to our friends and partners at Detroit Sports Podcast who help us to spread the word about this show each and every week. Please click like and subscribe here on YouTube. Leave us a positive review as well on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. Until next week, go Blue.